Welcome to Guardians of the Data. I'm your host, Ward Balcerzak. Each episode will explore the passions, expertise, and real-world experiences of security leaders who are helping the future of data security and governance. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Crescendo. To learn more about our AI-powered data security platform, please visit centro.io. Let's dive in. Welcome back to another episode of Guardians of the Data. My guest today has over 25 years of experience across IT and cybersecurity. He's a teacher, speaker, and author of numerous publications. Currently the director of cybersecurity at Crescendo, Joshua Copeland. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
Really good to have you here. It's been, we've had a few start and stops. It's been a long time coming, but here we are. Are you ready to get into it?
Happy to chat and see what we can discuss.
All right. Well, in your professional opinion, what's the biggest data security challenge that organizations are facing?
People are our biggest challenge, and it's not the normal tack where it's, your users are your biggest. It's really your leadership is your biggest challenge. Because ultimately they're the ones that determine what risks are accepted, what's your budget, what all the things that you can and can't do, and what exceptions we have for some people and what exceptions we don't have for other people. So I think in essence, cybersecurity is ultimately a very people-focused job, because it's not really about the bits and bytes. We like to hone in on the technology. We like to look at all the tools, but really it's protecting people and understanding people's behaviors so that we can protect them appropriately, and finding those happy middle grounds between the amount of friction that we need to have to be secure versus the amount of friction that's too much, that really smart people will find ways around the security that we build. So, people, and specifically, people in charge.
Oof. Okay. Definitely a shot to, I'm sure, some of the listeners, but I love it. And, totally agree. People definitely, to your point, people, users, weakest link. We've been saying that for decades, right? Since the internet, since computers became a thing. But leaders, I think that's an interesting spin. So what do we do about it, right? What do we do as cybersecurity professionals to get out of our own way, but also get our leadership out of our way?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that as cybersecurity professionals, we're really, really good at technology. We understand the tools, we understand the data flows, we understand the CVEs and the KEVs and all the bits and bytes, but ultimately we really suck at business. And that's where we fall flat, because unless you can talk business risk, not cyber risk, business risk, and you can talk real dollars and cents to the business, you're going to fail every single time. You're going to be in a board meeting, they're going to glass over and they're going to go, okay, Josh, go in your corner and do your cyber thing. But when I start talking about things that they truly care about, what's the risk to my business? If this happens, what does it do to our larger organization? What does it do to our ability to manufacture our product or run our service or do the things that make the company money? And when we start switching that mindset from, a purely technical cybersecurity piece into the more business piece, you get a lot more traction. And ultimately, we can't expect them to meet us where we are. They have that business mindset. They're worried about operations and the technical to whatever the product is that you have. They're not going to learn cybersecurity, nor should we expect them to learn cybersecurity. We need to learn the business, and specifically the business that you're supporting, because not all businesses are the same. If you work in the defense industrial base, that's a totally different animal than working for a privately owned manufacturing firm. That's different than a publicly owned retail firm. And they all have different and unique problems. The manufacturing firm is going to be really, really amped up around September when folks are trying to execute those end of year contracts for DoD and FedGov, where retail is going to be really amped up November, December, when that's their major buying season. Your private equity firms are going to be more amped up around their quarterly earnings. So understanding your business pieces really drives your ability to execute cyber in a way that makes sense to the business, but also protects your business in a way that you wouldn't be able to do if you didn't speak business.
Oh man, I feel like the torches are getting lit and the pitchforks are getting sharpened here. Talking to technical folks, right? Cybersecurity folks, hey guys, you're good at tech, you need to know business. I agree, right? In data security, you really need to understand that, to understand how data is being generated, used, so on and so forth. So, how do, in your opinion, how do some folks, even the front lines that are uber technical, they know their craft, maybe are lacking some of the people skills, how do they start to understand and kind of build some of those bridges and build those relationships?
Well, the very first thing is you need to talk to your peers. You need to build those relationships with the folks in your organizations that the decisions that you make are going to impact. Because ultimately, whether we like it or not, cybersecurity has largely been deemed the department of no by the business side. Um, and honestly, rightly so. That tends to be the answer that you get from cybersecurity is an automatic no, which one shouldn't be the fact, but two, it's because we don't necessarily understand the business piece. So talking to the folks who are in operations, who are in, those things that we're going to affect truly matters. So I'll give it an example. As a cybersecurity professional, we want to make sure that critical functions, we know who's doing it. We're doing all the right things, and we're going to put MFA on, each critical transaction. And, my cybersecurity hat goes, well, it's only going to take an extra 5 seconds to do that. 5 seconds is nothing, right? Until I talk to the operations side and go, I have 300 people who are each doing one of those critical things every minute for their entire area shift. And oh, by the way, we have 365 24/7 operations. And now start mathing that out, 300 people times this, times that. And that, 5 seconds becomes hours and hours where we have to either change our SLAs with our customers. We're going to have to either hire more people because it's going to take more time to do each of these transactions because, 5 seconds doesn't seem like much, but 5 seconds times 300 people times, 60 minutes an hour times 24 hours a day, that adds up significantly. You're talking hours and hours of productivity lost. And that's something that you're not going to really think about until you talk to the operations folks and go, no, this is what the real impact of the security is. And that's what I mean when you talk about finding the appropriate amount of friction. What's going to get us to the security level that our business needs, but also isn't so secure that people aren't going to do it or it's going to harm the business. Because if I'm harming the business, I'm doing no good to my organization. Because if there is no business, there is no need for cybersecurity. Nobody has a job. And that's a bad formula for everybody involved.
I've heard that exact same story that you kind of threw out there before. In fact, I've been there, working for a large financial, same type of thing, the call center, right? We're going to put MFA. And again, earlier in my career, it was like, hey, what the heck is the difference, right? Oh, you've got another MFA prompt. And it's like, oh, shoot, no, it's not just one MFA prompt. It's one MFA prompt every time you're doing this thing. To your point, times X people, it gets crazy very, very quickly. I feel like, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. I feel like, cybersecurity folks really good at developing the fence, right? The fence around what's going on. They build this grandiose thing. They fall in love with it. They then take it to the business right after they've built this thing and said, hey, business, look at this great box, right? Great fence that I created. And they kind of poop all over it, right? Say, oh man, that fence is not going to work. And immediately that puts the cybersecurity individual kind of on their heels and on the defensive. They close down. So, oh man, they didn't like my box. And that's it, right? Not a good working relationship at that point. What are your thoughts? Do you think that, the conversation's happening too late in the development cycle?
Yeah, absolutely. As cybersecurity folks, we like to build things based off of words I hate using, best practice, because it's best practice according to who, for what scenario. What's best practice for one organization is worst practice for another. Um, but also, we like to do things from a very academic perspective. This is what NIST says we should do, or this is what the CIS benchmark says. That doesn't necessarily provide what you need for your business and your unique case scenario. We can't build boxes blindly in our little lab, sitting back and don't look at the context in which we're going to be doing things. And that's kind of where we've largely failed, is not understanding the business to the point of how does this integrate into our business? What does our business operations look like? If I build this really great box, as you put, but nobody wants to use it and it doesn't meet the needs of the business, I've wasted time, I've wasted money, I've wasted engineering. And if I put time and money into tools, I've wasted that too. That's just been a complete wash and across the board, not a great thing.
Totally, totally. So, kind of going back to again, using the term "sucking at business," right, for cybersecurity folks. Um, Other than just having, conversations and, those types of things, what other options might, our peers have to kind of skill up on the business side instead of just skilling up on the technology side and learning that craft very well?
One of my first suggestions is go out and find the ISAC that's unique to your business. There's pretty much an ISAC for every industry that's out there. There's a multi-state ISAC for, state and local government, financial services, you know, uh, industry, manufacturing, water. There's something for everybody, but that will also give you an insight into what other organizations within your sphere of business are doing. And that kind of helps contextualize what folks are doing. And then there's lots and lots of great stuff out there, whether it's YouTube videos, Coursera, whatever, that, kind of gives you that mini MBA, so to speak, to just be able to talk in the language that they're going to understand, and talking to the business risk, talking to, you know, what this does to their P&L, what does this do to, their EBITDA, those terms that when you say those things and you use them correctly, the lights come on the folks on the other side of the fence. And the resources are out there. You just have to be willing to go find them and use them.
Again, I think those torches are getting lit. You're telling folks, right, uber nerd folks, that you're in my people to go and look at business YouTubes and stuff like that, not technology YouTubes. That's crazy speak, if you will. But I think you're right.
Not unknown for having a few unpopular opinions.
Well, so we got there, right? You are the unpopular opinion guy. Tell me a little bit more about that. How did that start?
Started now about 4 years ago. I looked on things like LinkedIn and seen what I call a lot of self-licking ice cream cones of, we're great, everything's awesome, cybersecurity is awesome, we're the best thing in the world. And that just really wasn't what I was seeing in the industry. I'm seeing a lot of folks struggling. I'm seeing a lot of just bad things occur because we're not doing the things that we need to do. And it started with kind of a 3-post series where, I kind of said, certifications suck. Then I followed it up with, your college degree doesn't mean anything. And then I followed that up with, your experience doesn't mean anything either. And people kind of, to your point, came at me with pitchforks, particularly when I said certifications aren't anything. And that's because they weren't understanding the context. Certifications tell me a lot about you, but they tell me a lot about what you knew one day for a 3-hour period of time and not much else, because it's just a snapshot on that particular day of what you knew. Now, I can hope that not only did you retain that information, that you have actually done the CPEs or CEUs or whatever your vendor calls it, and you're actually using that knowledge, retaining it, implementing it. But I've had way too many interviews with folks who have, master's degrees with focus on information assurance, with a CISP, with a focus on health. And then you ask them a basic question like, give me a cybersecurity framework, regulation, or requirement that you know and how it would apply to the job that you're applying to. And that person can't even spit out HIPAA, high tech, NIST, CIS, even vendor documentation. I get the blank stare and they go, well, what do you mean? I'm like, you have a CISP, that's 26% of your certification is knowing that information. You have a master's degree in information assurance. That's half of your degree, is knowing that and being able to implement that in paper.
Book smarts versus street smarts is what that comes down to.
Part of that, and then how much did you actually retain? How much did you learn versus how much did you read, regurgitate, and flush the next day?
Right. Right. So now that I'm talking to, or saying now that since I am talking to the unpopular opinion guy, I want to go to, and I hate that I'm doing it, but I'm going to do it because I am curious. AI and data security. Do you got any good, unpopular opinion nuggets on that? Any thoughts?
I think my best unpopular opinion on that is that your data is already in the AI, whether you realize it or not. What have you done to control what's that happening? You can have really cool, tight controls around everything that on your box, but everybody has one of these. And every, LMM that's out there has OCR capabilities. So I can take a picture of my screen and it will read whatever's there. So ultimately, every business, whether they like to admit it or not, has a shadow AI program. And how do you handle that? How do you create safe ways to use AI? How do you enable folks to do the things that they're going to do anyway in a way that is safe, sane, and doesn't get anybody arrested? And a lot of that's, being very lean forward. Folks are going to use AI tools. So if they're going to use AI tools, provide them AI tools that you at least have control over. Get them the, Gemini or the Chat GPT or GemSpark or whatever tool it is. Get it to where it has the data zero data retention. Get it where you can do some DLP around it. Where no, you cannot put things that look like credit card numbers into this. And then give them some really good training on how to appropriately use it. Teaching people how to use appropriate prompts. Prompt engineering is really a super easy skill to learn, but it's one of those things that truly determines how well of a result you're going to get from any of these Gen AI products, because you're giving it the instructions. You're not asking it just a question. You're saying, I want an answer to this question, but here's the context that I want you to give it to me from. I want you to be this type of person. I want you to have this type of knowledge. I want you to cite your sources and give me actual links back to why you gave me the answer you gave me and explain it to me like I'm 5. And that transitions you from having extreme risk of not knowing what people are doing and not knowing how they're engaging in it, to still risk, but more controlled risk.
I like that. And I like the where you went with prompt engineering too, because I remember the last organization I worked for, it's when I was there when AI really kind of hit main stage, if you will, right? Everyone was trying to use it. And they wanted us to do a study on how people were using it. So, my team, we had some tools where we can kind of monitor that. And I'm sure you've seen this. People were treating it like Google initially, right? Asking a question, get an answer. And it was just so funny when I would kind of take that back to the C-suite and say, well, here's what people are doing. And you kind of just got blank stares, be like, how is this different than, Bing search, Google's? It's not, right? At that time, it wasn't. How people were using it. So to your point, teaching, not just giving access, but saying, here's how you can use it. Here's how you do prompt engineering. Super, super important. Kind of going back to, unpopular opinion around AI. I want to hit you with mine on that. Get your thoughts. So, my unpopular opinion, at least as of late, with AI, has been around the risk. Right? There's a lot of people saying, "Oh my goodness, AI is bringing all this risk into the company." Blah blah. My unpopular opinion has been, it's not bringing any new risk. It's simply uncovering and thrusting into the spotlight all of the risk we've been ignoring for decades and all the things we've been ignoring when it comes to the basics, right? The basic hygiene, the basic access control, all of that. It's just that the AI, the co-pilots are saying, hey, look, we made it easier for you to see now that this is a problem.
Yeah, I don't disagree. The risk has been the same because the risk is ultimately what people are doing with the data. And AI is really just now another thing that they can use to access data, manipulate data, and potentially shift things off of your platforms into other platforms. The one I use, when I talk to people, like, you have AI in your environment? No, we don't. Like, all right, do you have Grammarly in your environment? Like, do you have folks in your HR, your marketing team that are using Grammarly? Like, well, yeah, it's Grammarly. I'm like, Grammarly not only has AI, because how do you think it works? But secondly, you installed intentionally a keylogger in your environment.
Right.
Like, so the stuff is going to be there. And a lot of times you approved it and didn't realize the second and third order effects of that. So really it comes down to, do you understand the risk to begin with? And the answer is probably not. And that's one of the problems that we have in cybersecurity is we use things that, like, CDSS scores that give us a pretty risk number, but that risk number is super generalized. You know, that's based off of the analyst who did that evaluation, their thoughts and opinions on that risk, not necessarily the risk to your organization or the risk to your data or the things that are unique to your organization. It's just giving you a generalized risk. Like, the medium vulnerability that I have on my Edge Fortinet is probably more important than the critical vulnerability I have on a print server that's buried 6 layers deep in my network that literally is locked down, that it can only get print traffic. But under the standard metrics that we look at, that critical vulnerability is the thing I have to fix right now because it's a critical vulnerability and my documentation says I have to fix that within 15 days. And I might not ever get to that medium vulnerability on my Edge Fortinet network that actually is exploitable if I have these 3 other vulnerabilities in my environment. You know, it comes down to the point of, do you actually understand your environment? Do you understand how the people in your environment work and what their workflows are? If you don't, AI is just going to be another thing you don't understand.
Ooh, so many ways I could pivot off of that. But I want to go back to, you made a statement around not understanding the risk, right? Folks not understanding the total risk. Some of that definitely could be because the original analysts they didn't write it up well enough, they didn't dig far enough, you name it. There's tons of reasoning that could be why an executive didn't understand something. So any tips or tricks to get better at identifying, documenting, speaking, and then finally getting to some sort of consensus on total risk level, risk acceptance, anything like that?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is truly understanding what your business processes are. A lot of times we build things out without understanding where the critical things in the workflow are. We just make basic assumptions on, you know, this is important, so I should do this. So talking to the operations folks, how do you do your job? If this, and this break, what does that do to your workflow? And once you start building that kind of out and knowing, okay, what's the most important thing to my business? Is it building product? Is it getting product out? Is it, shipping things? Is it, running the retail website? What's important to our revenue generation? And what are the things that support that? And then start building risk around things that enable that one way or the other. And you can start kind of building those concentric layers around it, going, okay, if this happens, it does not affect my core business. That generates money, that generates my revenue. But it does affect these three other things that are not as important, but still important. So I will use the example of in a retail environment, having your e-commerce thing is probably your most important piece if you're a web retailer. But secondary to that, having your accounting systems running does not affect your true business function, but it absolutely affects your revenue. And understanding how those pieces interface and going, okay, if my accounting's down, my e-commerce can still run. And once I get this back up, it'll batch in and do what it needs to do. But understanding kind of how those pieces fall into place with each other and how the big puzzle, so to speak, interlocks with each other allows you to really give better contextualization of risk. And I'll give you an example. Here in Louisiana, a couple of weeks ago, we had a snowstorm. It's a once every 5-year thing. We had all of like 3 inches of snow and some ice. I grew up in the Northeast, and that's Tuesday. Here, that's absolute chaos. Like everything was shut down for 5 days, including the military installation. We had massive, widespread power outages. Things were really bad. The I-20 corridor up here where I live had where people were stuck on there for 30 hours. And that's because that's a risk that we looked at and went, that's unlikely. The cost to mitigate that risk, to build the sand and salt domes, get that material brought in, shipped and stored, buying all the snow plows, buying all the people to do that, buying the salt spreader trucks, getting the salt sprayer trucks, all those things, that's a huge capital expense for something that occurs every 5 years or so and will shut us down for, 5 days. Is that something we're going to expect or invest millions and millions of dollars in? Probably not. Does it suck when it happens? Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what we do in cybersecurity and in business in general is look at what the risks are. How likely is this to occur to my organization? And as a security professional, we want to make sure that we're prepared against any risk that could come to us, any potential attack vector. And that's great. We would all do that if we had unlimited budgets. I worked for DoD, and even in DoD, we did not have unlimited budget. Like, if there was going to be somebody that had unlimited budget, it would be that. And DoD had kind of the right mindset. For my super critical things, this is a network that we use for that with this level of protection, with this level of capabilities around this, with this level of redundancy. For my stuff that's still important, but not as important, here's this other network that has more protections than our basic unclassified stuff, but not as much as this other one. And that's kind of how we have to look at things from a cybersecurity perspective is how do we protect against the things that are going to happen to us? And how do we mitigate to the reasonable degree of the things that might happen to us? If the cure is worse than the disease, maybe I just don't do anything with it. You know, if the cost to mitigate, this printer vulnerability is, $100,000 because I have to completely re-engineer the environment, but my actual quantified risk is $5,000. Well, I assure you, I'm not going to spend $100,000 to fix that risk.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think that's where it gets tough for some folks, right? To actually quantify that entirely to include likelihood. It's one of the things you were kind of talking about there is likelihood for something to actually happen. Um, I've seen it with my own teams where it's like, okay, hey, yeah, there's a risk. What's the likelihood of happening? Well, it's easy for them to do. Okay, it's easy, but again, what's the likelihood of that happening? I think that's where some cyber folks get stuck, right? And being able to do that. So, Josh, you've obviously done this for a few years, right? About 25 years in the industry. How did you get to where you are today? What was your journey?
Um, I was one of those folks who I accidentally fell into IT and cybersecurity. Uh, I was in high school. I knew I didn't have money for college, and I went, well, everyone else in my family joined the military. I'm going to go join the military too because they pay for college. And I originally joined as a logistics specialist. And at my first duty station, they're like, hey, Airman Copeland, we have this extra duty thing that we need someone to do. You said you kind of like playing with computers. We need you to be a work group administrator. Would you be willing to do that as an extra duty? And contrary to everything I've been told my entire career in my life growing up as a military dependent of never volunteer for anything, I went, yeah, sure, I'll go do that. And that uh, turned into be a great experience that I eventually formally retrained into IT and cybersecurity and got to do really cool stuff. And the DoD, I got to do some really cool physical penetration testing, breaking into military installations, breaking into special forces units, stealing their stuff, um, and doing some just really cool thought processes and, breaking in using things like the backup battery system for a air operations center and causing brownouts that causes their servers to fail over, which in turn causes their operation to have to shut down for 5 hours while they relocate it to another location. And because I did one thing over here, now there's been lack of bomber global command and control because I did this one thing and, turned off their power through a building power system, so I got to do some really cool stuff from that perspective. I retired in 2018 from active duty and went and did cool stuff with the Fed contracting space, working with the three-letter spooky agencies, building out cloud platform security things. Worked in the state and local government space, building out MSP offerings. Did some private industry with some manufacturing. Did some commercial MSP. Currently here at Crescendo, I'm doing some really cool stuff around AI and AI enablement of business processes and how you can use AI to make things better, faster, cheaper, and give you a superior product output. We kind of flip things on the end where most people look at AI as humans enabled by AI. We have AI enabled by humans. Humans are our back end as opposed to AI being the back end. So that's kind of a unique perspective on it and how we're running business. I truly kind of took the non-traditional path of, hey, do you want to go do this thing that you've never done before? Yeah, cool. Let's go do that thing. And I've had a amazing career just saying yes to things.
Man, that is that's an awesome start, right? You weren't there and you just said yes and here you are today. So, you know, I'm sure you see it. You're on LinkedIn probably more than I am. There's a lot of folks out there, unfortunately currently looking for jobs due to various reasons. Maybe it's the first time breaking in, maybe they've got multiple years like you and I and trying to find their new opportunity. Any words of advice for those folks looking right now as the things maybe they should focus on or should do to get their next opportunity?
Best advice I have is networking with people. Network, network, network. Um, Most jobs that are out there are going to have hundreds, if not thousands of applications. And the quickest, fastest, and easiest way to get your name to the top of the list to actually get an interview is a referral or know somebody. So network as much as you can. Pretty much every area has some kind of, you know, IT or cyber group chapter, whether it's a ISACA chapter, whether it's a ISC squared, a as is, and AFCEA, a military cyber professionals, insert whatever group, a DEF CON group. Here in Louisiana, we have several. We have a Southwest Louisiana Cyber Club. Up where I'm at, we have Tech by 20, which is, supporting all things technology in the I-20 corridor. There are all of these groups that are out there. Get out and meet folks who are in the industry. Um, I'll tell you that um, I've helped folks get jobs because I knew someone who was hiring and I knew someone who was looking, and I went, you two should talk to each other. And sometimes it's literally that simple of just getting people to talk to each other. You and I think before the call started talking about, RSA, and RSA is great. You're going to have an amazing time. It's huge. It's massive. You're going to be overflowed with information, but it's expensive and it's in San Francisco, you know, but what there are is lots and lots of small regional conferences all over the country. There are B-sides in pretty much every major metropolitan area. Go attend these small conferences where you're going to get lots and lots of folks who are regional to you, where they're folks who are in your industry, particularly might be in the same segment of industry, because obviously, regionally things kind of tend to be similar. Like in South Louisiana, there's a lot of, oil and gas industry, lots of manufacturing. So lots of capability of networking folks who are kind of in that similar vein of speciality, and just kind of get out and meet people, have those conversations, engage on networks like LinkedIn. Don't just sit there and, silently watch and read the threads. Engage with folks. I will tell you that everyone I know that's a hiring manager will absolutely, anybody they're going to interview will LinkedIn stalk you. They will go look at what your profile is.
Oh,
They will go
yes.
see what you have, and they will see what you're engaging in, what comments that you're having. And that is your opportunity to show well beyond what your resume would have, what your level of knowledge and capability is. If you're engaging with, the quote unquote thought leaders that are in the field, and you're asking good questions, you're giving, good suggestions, good tips, you're providing good mentorship, that means something to folks who are doing hiring, because that means that you're actually capable. You're not just that paper tiger who has the certs and has the degree, but doesn't actually have the chops to do the job.
I like that. So, speaking of networking, if folks want to connect with you, what's the best way to do so?
Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I am, in/Joshua Copeland, easy to find. My posts are generally fairly easy to find. I generally have some kind of weird cyberpunk thing that has my face on it. So if you see it, that's probably me, or someone who's reposted my stuff because they either disagree with it vehemently and are ranting about it, or agree with me completely and go read this stuff. And then I'm at conferences all over the country. So if you're at a conference, hit me up, see if I'm going to be there. I'm going to be down at Louisiana's B-Sides in NOLA in May. So if you're in the South Louisiana area or just want to go visit New Orleans, definitely recommend that you check that out. Normally it's B-Sides and NOLACon are that same week. So that's 2 cybersecurity conferences in 1 week in New Orleans, and they're both fairly cheap. So book a trip to New Orleans.
Definitely worse places to be, that's for sure. Well, Josh, big thank you for joining. I'm glad we were finally able to record this episode.
Yeah. Technical difficulties aside, this was a great conversation.
Awesome. And big thank you to the audience. Really hope you enjoyed the episode and learned something today. Please tell others in your network to follow and listen. This has been another exciting episode of Guardians of the Data. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Guardians of the Data. Thanks for tuning in. For show notes and more, visit guardiansofthedata.show. Guardians of the Data is made possible by support from Centro. To see how we help organizations discover and classify all of their data accurately and automatically while quickly achieving petabyte-scale data protection without the fuss, please visit centro.io. Catch you next time.